Hey guys, Scott Poley here. I am a session guitarist and pedal steel player. I also produce and write music. And over the years, I've played hundreds and hundreds of guitars. And one of the common misconceptions that people have is how to set up the neck of their guitar and how to tweak the neck set angle itself or the truss rod. And people, myself included, don't understand how to adjust that. And it's a relatively simple thing to do. So in this video, I've enlisted my good friend and my favourite repairman, Phill Orme from Doghouse Guitar Repairs, to show you how to set up the neck of your guitar. This video, which is part of a series of setting up this brilliant little Harley Benton Strat style guitar, shows you how to shim the neck of the guitar, how to adjust the truss rod, and various other things. So without further ado, let's go and see Phill Orme.
I'm just going to crack the neck, take the neck off very quickly. Always make sure you use the right screwdriver for taking these the screws out the back of these necks. This is a number 2 Phillips in these, and make sure it's a good fit, because a lot of people use these, they get a bigger screwdriver, that's a posi, and it's not quite right, and you'll end up chewing the screw.
Yeah, you'll strip the screws.
So just make sure you use the right
Been
screwdriver.
there, done that, and it'll be really uncomfortable under your hands, and then you'll be buying new screws.
Absolutely.
And, yeah.
So these are number 2 Phillips. So I'm just going to take that off. So in the neck pocket now, so this is where we're going to put the shim, just behind these 2 screws. Now, there's a couple of schools of thought. Again, this is, if it was a really, really expensive guitar, then I would be inclined to make a full pocket shim, but it's incredibly time consuming to make.
And that's basically just a very fine wedge.
Yeah, it's a piece of, I
material.
use a bit of a hardwood, the same type of wood as the guitar body or the neck, or a hardwood, something that's not going to crush unevenly, And you cut one exactly the same size as that, and then you taper it. But if you imagine tapering from maybe 3/4 of a millimetre down to nothing, you need some...
really specialist kit.
Yeah, I attach these shims to another piece of wood, and then on the belt sander, then I have to make adjustments. But, they're normally laser cut. You can buy them. But in this situation, the reason why we use full pocket shims instead of just a piece, especially if you need to shim it a lot, is otherwise you end up with an air gap around here. But that's not the main problem. The main problem is the neck can slowly collapse, and you end up then with a hump. Fenders, I think it's the late 70s, had this problem. They used to call it the ski slope, where the end of the fingerboard used to curl up, because when they were shimmed and in the fender factory, they used to use bits of belt sander paper just shoved in the back just to straighten it, which was kind of the way things were done then. But then everything else collapsed between that and the front 2 screws. And it basically made the fingerboard like a ski slope at the end, and it buzzed at the end, and people wondered why it was buzzing, and they couldn't fix it. And the only way you could do that is by taking all the frets out, and then levelling the fingerboard, and then re-fretting it. And so, but with this situation, with something like this, it's going to be fairly straightforward. Okay, so what we're going to do is going to make a little small hardwood shim just to sit behind those 2 rear screw holes. So I've got a piece of veneer here, which I measured before, and that's at 0.54. So it's not a bad start. Obviously, if I find that the next angle's wrong, I can then take that out and put like a 0.1 in, or there's other ways of doing it. You can release the front 2 screws and put, get the feeler gauges out and put those in until you get what your angle, then you'll know exactly what shim. But again, for the purpose of this, I'm trying to do it as basic as possible so anybody can ever do this. And of course, the classic way people used a lot was the string packet, because the string packet's about 0.5 millimetre. So you could cut a piece of the string packet and drop that in. I wouldn't really recommend that but it's paper, it's made of wood, it's not the end of the world, I guess. So I just want it, first of all, kind of thin enough to sit behind those 2 screws, which is about there. I'm then going to roughly get the right sort of size, which is going to be roughly about there. And then I'm going to round the corners just to sit into the neck pocket. So that shim now sits behind the 2 screws. It's not perfect, but as I say, I know I would normally take more time than this. But this is just to kind of give people an idea. Put the screws back in. Now, remember me saying before that when I measured it with the string tension on, there was still quite a lot of relief. But now take the strings off, the neck's going to be flatter. the relief, the truss rod's going to be pulling the neck straighter. So when I now do the same thing about trying to see if the neck angle's right, it's going to be actually more accurate because the neck's actually straighter now. So these screw holes are really tight. The other thing I would seriously recommend as well, when you're putting screws into a guitar, into wood, go to the hardware stores and buy a block of beeswax, especially the smaller screws, things like the screws that go in for the machine heads.
Yeah.
Because these are made out of plasticine these days. The quality of the materials is awful. And what happens is when you're screwing into a hardwood like maple, the metal gets hot. Just by screwing into the maple, it gets hot. And because it's poor quality, the heads can shear off, and that'll leave the stud in. Then you need a stud extraction. You need to plug it and re-drill it. So the easiest way to do is just get a block of beeswax and a couple of quid from the hardware store. You need some sort of paraffin wax or oil or something. You mix the two together to make a paste. So you just don't want it solid. So there's a paste that's kind of 50-50. I use the oil you use for wood boards, but it's a mineral oil. But this is not being, because it's food safe, and I use this on the fingerboards as well, because a lot of the lemon oils they use, because they're not food safe, they can rot, and that can cause problems. So I do that 50-50 with the beeswax, heat it in a pan, mix it, let it go cold, and then it becomes like a paste rather than solid. And then you basically just dip the screws into it and then screw in, and that will give it the lubrication. It's natural, it's waxed, it's fine. They won't heat up, they won't break, you don't have any problems. So yeah, that's useful sort of, I'm now covered in wax. So back in the playing position. So now, rest this on. And see now, it's actually, see it's just roughly at the takeoff point. See, it's not down here like it was, it's now up here. So before it was down here somewhere, now it's kind of straight, it's just on that takeoff point of that saddle. So I know that once the relief's back on and the tension, it's probably going to drop a little bit, but we've got the adjustment back. So that's the neck sorted as far as getting the neck set angle right, and that looks good. Now there's a couple of things we can do, like the frets. So there's a couple of things we want to check. And again, it's a little bit difficult unless you've got the right tools, but if you get one of these are four-sided machines, completely flat on each side, and it allows you to check 3 frets. It spans 3 frets, so anywhere you are, you can find a side that'll just span 3 frets. If this fret is higher than the ones either side of it, then you're going to get some rocking, which will... This is going to be the first cheap guitar that actually is perfect. Oh, no, hang on. Oh, hey! Can you hear that? So that fret, I can't believe that. I mean, normally these guitars, I've got to say, these Harley Bentons, although they're like a class as a budget guitar, I've worked on tons of these, and they're incredible for the money. They need setting up a little bit, and they have a few sharp fret ends, and I don't work for Harley Benton, but if they want to send me any free guitars, I'm quite happy to promote them. You know? No, these are actually really well made. The quality of the woods is good. Hardware's pretty decent. Just need a setup. That's incredible. Because I'm desperately trying to find a high fret to show you how to reset it. There isn't any.
And high frets aren't even necessarily a bad thing as such. They can happen at any time if your guitar's gone through a different climate or...
Well, the reason normally, there's a couple of things. I mean, most of the time, mass-produced guitars, the frets aren't glued in. They're just pressed in, hammered in, machine. Now, if you think a piece of fret wire, so I've got a piece of fret wire. If you can see the actual tang, if I turn it around this way, you've got the tang, which is the bit that goes into the wood. And you can measure that. And then you've got these tiny little dimples, these diamonds that stick out. So if you've got a fret slot that's generally cut, you know, the slot in the wood before the fret goes in is generally cut between sort of 20, 21, 22, 23 thousandths. You've then got a piece of fret wire, which is roughly the same. So the actual tang itself, the bit that goes into the wood, is, say, 22 thousandths. So the same as the slot. The only thing that's holding that in is those tiny little diamonds down each side of the fret. That's the only thing that's holding that fret in. So if you think it's a piece of wood gets dry, it shrinks slightly, the fret's radius, so it's under tension, and it'll pop. It just lifts a fraction because it's not really holding it in anymore. It's another reason why we need to keep the fingerboard conditioned. like finish necks, if you've got a maple neck that's got a finish on it, that kind of stops those problems because the finish actually runs into the slots and keeps it all in place. And the good thing about having the frets glued in is then if you do get a little bit of shrinkage, it's not going to pop. It's going to be more stable. The other thing it does is there's always a gap. So the bottom of the fret slot, so where this sits in, is especially on in fact on most guitars, will be slightly more than the actual bottom of the tang. So there'll be a gap, an air gap. That the water thin super glue is going to fill up that air gap. And when it goes hard, you get better tone. But
these are basic jobs as well you would get a luthier to do. If you took it to go and get your guitar set up properly by someone who knows what they're doing, then this is absolutely stuff that they can do for you.
I think, if it depends on, unfortunately, there's an awful lot of charlatans around these days, which will do the least amount of things to make the guitar play, which is a shame, really, and charge you stupid amounts of money. If you get a trusted luthier, then they should go through all these things.
So what are we doing next, Phil?
So I'm just going to, sometimes you get some tarnish on the frets, just to sweat off your fingers and the metal, you end up with this tarnishing on the frets. So you can clean them up. I mean, you can get these really expensive pads now that don't sort of shed all the little bits of metal. But this stuff, this is quadruple O, so it's 4 zeros, wire wool. Comes in a reel like this. You don't want to use the stuff they use in plumbing that's would take your skin off. This is the stuff they use for French polishing, so it's not very aggressive, and they use it for putting finishes on tables. But what it does do is you can polish up the frets, you can take the tarnishing off the frets. You can also do it on the wood. It'll take any grime and grot off the fingerboard. The other thing, if you find sometimes when people take the strings off the guitars and they can see this sort of ground in sweat and mixture of finger stuff all over, and it looks like waves. There's a couple things you can use. Now, unfortunately, again, in this country, I order like 5 litres of the stuff in these, but it costs a fortune to get delivered because and you need certificates and all sorts to be able to carry it. So you can use lighter fluid. As long as you look on the back, and it says on the back, it says contains solvent naphtha. So naphtha is the stuff. It's not harmful to any finish on the guitar. It's not going to take any paint off, including nitrocellulose. It's going to be fine. Some of the lighter fluids are made from other things these days, and I don't be doing that, But if you find one, this is just the one you get off the market. They're like £1 in B&M bargains or somewhere, one of the cheap sort of...
Yeah. Or Target if you're watching this in the States.
Yeah,
or whatever.
what's the other one? The JC Penney's. So if I pour a bit on there and I rub it in and you watch it, it just evaporates, It's gone. And this won't harm the plastic, it won't harm it'll take any grot or anything off anything basically. And you can see the dirt coming off onto this. So this will clean your fingerboard up, take any of that playing grot and grime off. So this is a single edge razor blade. It's a brand new one. And basically, if you've got a real heavy build-up, if you keep this completely parallel 90 degrees and scrape backwards and forwards, you literally just take a little tiny bit of the top surface of the wood off, but uniformly. So you run between the frets. And that will actually, this guitar's really clean, so if I had a fingerboard that was really grotty, it just takes all that grime and grot off, because what you don't want to do is put fretboard conditioner on top of grime, because it's not going to go through the grime into the wood. It's just going to sit and make it more grimy. So you really want to clean the fingerboard up first. And this only really applies to rosewood, ebony, those sort of things. You obviously don't want to be doing anything with your maple fingerboards.
Yeah, especially if it's lacquered.
If it's lacquered, yeah. And then I'm just going to put now I know this says Luthier's. This is just the container. It's actually, like we said before, it's the it's just the chopping board, which is food safe, and it's the same stuff. And you're just going to put a light amount onto the fingerboard. Just going to rub it all in. And I'm just using a bit of lint flea cloth. It's actually, I think it was one of the New Romantic shirts from the 1980s. I was actually into punk, but we saying that for a fact.
Not Frankie Says Relax.
Oh, God. No. So, yeah, just going to go down the fingerboard and just give it just wipe. And you don't need a lot. Just think less is more. And you're just going to leave that just to soak in for a minute or two. And then I'm going to wipe off the excess, and that's fine. Don't need to over-oil the board. It's just enough to keep it fed. Okay, so I've got the strings on. They're kind of roughly in tune now. I've stretched them quite a bit, but you know, obviously this is still going to start moving, and the neck's pulling into relief because it's a heavy gauge of strings. You can now see the action is massively high, but that's because we've got a massive amount of relief in the neck now, again because of the extra string tension on this gauge of strings. So I'm just going to adjust the truss rod. Now I'm going to take a wild guess. Harley Benton's probably, it should be a 4mm. If it's a Fender, it could be 3/16, it could be 1/16. Yeah, that's 4mm on this one. Now, if you see people adjust the truss rods and they put it in, if you want to take, if the neck's too bent that way, so that there's too much relief, you need to tighten the truss rod to pull against the string tension. Did you hear that crack then?
Yeah.
That's the truss rod moving. It's just moved slightly at the top here. So we want to try and pull the neck straighter. So I want to tighten so it's righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So if you need more relief, you loosen the nut on the truss rod. The only problem is, I think, on these, like on a lot of modern guitars now, they have a thing called a dual-action truss rod, which means when it gets all the way loose, it'll then start getting tight again because it will push the neck into relief. So if you've got something like that, it may be worth taking it to a luthier for the first time. If you've got a single-action truss rod on an older guitar, then it only go one way. If you do it left, the nut will eventually come off. If it doesn't come off, it's a two-way rod, and you've got to know whether they've already gone past the center point or not. So some people can keep going the wrong way and end up breaking the rod. But I'm going to show you the adjustments. So if you want to tighten the rod, do not just put the truss rod key in and turn it, because you're asking the truss rod, which is a slimish piece of metal, to pull the wood a long way.
Yeah.
So what happens is you adjust it, you think, oh, that's okay, and that rod will keep pulling the wood because the wood moves slowly. So by the time you get home, it's buzzing. So the way you do this is just sit yourself down, put the guitar in between your legs, left knee at the back of the heel there. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the neck this way until I can see the action going down and I can see the neck straightening. Can you see that moving?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I pull it to roughly where I want it, and then I'm going to nip the rod up to hold it in that position then. And then I'm going to check it. So back in the knee, first fret, roughly where it joins the body, still too much relief. I'm doing this by eye initially, I'm then going to check it with the gauges. So again, get the truss rod key in. I'm going to pull the neck to where I want it, and then turn the just a small amount, 1/8 of a turn at a time. Don't be turning the rod tons. Check it. That's not bad actually, getting closer. Maybe one more little tiny turn. So I'm going to put some tension, and I'm going to little tiny turn, and that's not bad now. The problem is for most people, to do fret end, you really need a fret end file. Which is something like this, and they're not particularly cheap. They can be made, but they're like convex and concave. So the concave version side of it allows you to get tighting. So what happens is when the frets are leveled in the factory, the metal gets pushed out on the ends of the frets, and it leaves a sharp edges. Now, obviously, they can't at this sort of price point can't get people to come in and start taking all the sharp corners off.
Absolutely.
Because it's just too time consuming. So that the concave, convex, I always get me concave and convex mixed up. I think I'm convex, aren't I? So the concave basically knocks that sharp bit of metal that's sticking out, and then the rounded side, the concave, then allows you to round the fret, and then you can polish it up and takes away. Then you won't feel that sharp bit of metal there.
Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you got value out of this video, I would love it if you'd like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell icon. It will let you know when I release new videos, which I do every single week. And also be sure to check out the other episodes in this little mini-series of how to set up this brilliant little Harley Benton Strat style guitar, which you can win too. Details in the description below.